Okay, well, let's quickly recap the three-note chords and then go over chord inversions before we move on. Okay, we learned how to build major chords from a major scale. And we learned that really all the three-note chords are just variations on that major chord. The first thing we learned is that a minor chord is just a major chord with the middle note dropped a half step. And then we learned that a major chord can be altered to augment it by increasing the last note a half step. And we can also suspend major chords by moving that middle note either up a half step or down a whole step. And then finally we learned that minor chords can be further modified to diminish them by dropping the last note of the chord a half step, and that's called a diminished chord. And that's all there is to three-note chords. If you understood all the other videos, you understand that recap, and you totally follow how to build any of the three-note chords. Now I want to talk about inversions of chords because it's very important when you're playing to be able to invert chords to keep everything smooth and within a range, and also use that inversion maybe to get a different sound that you want. Inversions are different layers or ways of playing the same chord. For example, I like to start with C always. So if we start with the C major chord, we have the notes C, E, and G. And move that around a little bit, we could maybe play the E first, and then the G, and then pick out a C up here. It's still a C major chord. It sounds basically the same, but it's in a different position. And since it's a three-note chord, there's one more possibility. We could start with the G, and then we could put the C and then the E. Still a C major chord. It sounds basically the same. But in each case, there's a different root note, or the bottom note is different. In the first one, the one note, the C note, is in the root, or in the bass. In the second one, the E note, or the third note from the scale, is in the bass. And in the last one, the G note is in the bass. So let's hear how they sound. Those are the three inversions of a C major chord. The first one we call the root, the next one we call the first inversion, and the last one we call the second inversion. A little bit confusing because it's easy to think that this one here is the first, but while it is the root and the first in there, what they mean when they say the first inversion is the first alteration of the root is this. The first inverting of the notes around occurs here, and then the second next logical inversion is here. Now if you did it again, you'd just be back to a C again with C in the root, just an octave higher. So there's no point in going any higher with this. So when we talk about inversions, you can either talk about playing the root, or the first inversion, or the second inversion. And when you notate it, it's common to notate them A, B, and C. We'll get back to that later when we start referring to chords by Roman numerals instead of their letter names, and we start thinking about chords in the abstract instead of in a concrete sense. And then those A, B's, and C's, we'll use those to indicate how we're going to invert a given chord. One of the reasons inversions are useful is that chords occur in a predictable pattern, and we'll talk about why that is later, but moving around the keyboard to, usually with the left hand, to accompany a melody, if you were always stuck with the root position, would get awkward, take up a lot of room, and sound kind of clunky. So let's say we had a typical chord pattern from the 50s or something, which is what's called a 1-4-5, which would be the C major would be the 1, the F major would be the 4 because it's the fourth note of the C major scale, and the G major would be the 5 because it starts on the fifth note. And so we call it 1-4-5. Without using inversions, here's what we'd have to play. We'd have to play everything in root position. So here's the C, then here's the F, and here's the G. And this is actually Louie Louie. Okay, now, if we can invert though and still get the same effect, we can not have to move our hands so much and it won't sound so clunky. And there's various ways we could do this. I'm going to use my right hand so I stay out of the camera's way. But here's the first inversion of C, where I start on E and I play E, G, C. And then if I want to play F from there, I just move these two notes up, and now I've got F in its root position. And then if I want to play G, I can play it here in the second inversion. And it keeps everything within this one note octave, so it goes like this. By understanding the use of these inversions, we can keep the movement, whether it's the right hand or the left hand, to a minimum and smooth out the transitions between the chords so that they don't sound so jumpy and different all the time. And that is a big part of the use of inversions. And you'll find that as you're playing, you'll realize that if you don't use inversions, there's going to be clashes between your left and right hands when they meet in the middle. Another use for inversions, it's used by the songwriter a lot of times to keep a certain note, often the melody note, as the root note in the bass. So even though maybe the melody is at a G and the chord that accompanies it is a C, rather than playing the C in the bass, if I do the second inversion, I can play the G in the bass. So it's still a C major, and the melody happens to be on G, so it doubles the melody note with the bass note. And you see that a lot with I notice Billy Joel and Elton John do that kind of thing a lot.